appreciate you. And on behalf of the pastorates of Restoration House, Hamilton, we thank you for being here. This is the second annual public lecture of the Restoration House, Hamilton. Before I invite the panelists over to the stage, I want to read my own version of the land acknowledgement. I recognize and acknowledge that the land wherein we live, work, and now call home is in the traditional territory of the Mississauga and the Haudenosaunee Nation, and within the land protected by the dish with one spoon, one pound agreement. As an individual of Black African descent, I offer this land recognition in solidarity with the indigenous people of the land, whom I now call home, in their efforts and deliberate intentions towards decolonization. I recognize that while I came here voluntarily in the desire to better my lived experiences and raise my family in a safe place, others of my race were involuntarily brought here due to transatlantic trade, slave trade. I acknowledge the complexity therein in this land, express my deep gratitude to the indigenous peoples, and pledge to honor the divinity that ultimately connects us all. Thank you very much. Okay, so with that, we will invite our panelists for today's session. The theme for today's public lecture is social isolation as a public health challenge. And we have a team of very excellent and experienced panelists that will be diving through this discussion from different philosophical and experiential viewpoints as relating to the topic. So I want to recognize in absentia one of our speakers, Kimberly Kato. She's the founder of the True Roots Counseling Service, who unfortunately for some reasons is not able to join us today. I also want to recognize the presence of Dr. Oluwatoyin Oyelade. Dr. Oluwatoyin Oyelade is the president of the CASA Foundation and partner of Invap Corporation. Dr. Oluwatoyin Oyelade, okay, is also on our way. Okay, so I also want to recognize another of our panelists, Chantal Gray. Chantal Gray is the co-founder, registered social workers and psychotherapist. Chantal Gray, please a round of applause for her as she comes up on stage. A round of applause, please. Okay, can you keep clapping until she sits down? Thank you very much. Encourage her. Okay. Okay, so I also want to recognize the presence of Elizabeth Idowu. Elizabeth Idowu is the founder and psychotherapist of Restore Peace Counseling and Psychotherapy. Please a round of applause for her as she comes up also on stage. You can keep clapping until she gets to the stage. Just encourage her. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Okay, so I notice Dr. Oluwatoyin is in the building. So I also want to invite Dr. Oluwatoyin Oyelade, the president of CASA Foundation, as he joins us also on stage. Thank you very much for coming. My apologies. So Oluwatoyin is the executive, the pastor of Restoration House, Hamilton. So that's what is on my head when I was reading the name. It is actually Oluwatoyin Oyelade. Please, my apologies, ma'am. It shows you how connected we are. Okay. Okay. So we move to the first session. We'll be inviting Dr. Oluwatoyin Oyelade for our presentation. Before we do that, I'm going to read Dr. Oluwatoyin's bio. She's a seasoned leader with a doctorate in leadership and management from the University of Maryland Global Campus. As a partner at INCAP, she oversees all aspects of business development and operations. Her extensive career spans roles in financial services, management consulting, project management, and funds management across Europe, Africa, and North America. Previously, she held executive position at CASA Development and Intercontinental Groups. As president of CASA Foundation, Dr. Oyelade manages the organization, which is one of 30 selected by the Canadian government to administer the $100 million Black Entrepreneurship National Ecosystem Fund. CASA Foundation also hosts the annual Friends of Africa Economic Development Conference, promoting African business growth. Dr. Oyelade is active in community development and serves on various non-profit boards, including Vital Manor and Core Belt Foundation, contributing to corporate diversity and social impact initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Oyelade.
Thank you again very much. Thank you for the kind introduction. Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, it's such an honor, it's such a pleasure to be here tonight, joining you at the public lecture, the annual public lecture, the second one at the Restoration House. I say it's Restoration House Leadership Institute. That's the way you're described in our books at CASA Foundation. It's not just a church, but it's actually also a learning institution where great minds are shaped. All right, so it's such a joy, it's such a pleasure to be here. I bring warm greetings from CASA Foundation and our team members, and I do have some of our team members in the room tonight, and I'm sure I'm going to become, coming back to them. I'll just get started. I think it was in 2022 that CASA Foundation actually started engaging actively with the Restoration House as a leadership institute. And so we really did get engaged with a few of the other people, some of the leadership members and so on, because we had a program and we wanted the Restoration Leadership Institute to be a part of the program. And so we reached out to quite a number of churches actually within the GTA. And so we do actually work with a number of churches within the GTA. Restoration Leadership Institute is one of them. But in 2022, we actually had very constructive, very, very meaningful engagement. And I must say that it's been very profitable for us dealing with and working with Restoration Leadership Institute. And so today, I just would quickly like to acknowledge again Pastor Olayinka and Pastor Toyin Dada. Thank you so much for working with us. Thank you for allowing your team also to work with us at CASA Foundation. It's such a joy, it's such a pleasure, and I'm really most honored to have been invited again this year to the public lecture. And to all the members of the panel, it's such a joy and it's such a pleasure, and I'm sure I'll be hearing from you at some point. A part of the lecture, I would actually defer to you as the experts, and so we'll be coming back to you. All right, so having done that, let's get on with it. So tonight, I've been asked to speak on the topic of social isolation. social isolation as a public health challenge. And so that's exactly what we'll be talking about. I know there's a Q&A, and the Q&A appears to be much longer, like a 40-minute Q&A. I'm not sure what those questions are, but I think I take some comfort in the fact that we do have some experts in the house tonight, and so we'll be doing this together. Thank you again, everyone. All right, so let me quickly say, when you talk about isolation, social isolation, I mean, there are so many parts to it, and in my journey as an entrepreneur, in my journey as an investor and an entrepreneur, I see that the topic of social isolation, it cuts across different parts. And when you look at social isolation, I think I'm so much more familiar with social capital, because that's what I do. An entrepreneur is always looking for how to build capital and so on. And in the process of doing that, there are a lot of issues that just might occur, that just might keep happening along the way, that would actually cause you as an entrepreneur to become isolated, even in such instances. And so this evening, I'll quickly like to start with the statistics. I do have a slide, and I'm just going to ask maybe one of our team members to just help me use the clicker to go along. While I just use this, it will be faster for me. Thank you. All right, thank you. Thank you. All right, so in Canada, when you Statistics Canada shares with us and says 3 in 10 older adults live alone, and a third of them report feeling isolated. What does that mean to us? Isolation and loneliness were associated with poor wellness practices. Isolated males, particularly those aged between 65 and 74 years, who live alone, are usually more vulnerable to poorer mental health. And in the United States, our closest neighbor, I must say, over 60% of adults in the United States report feeling lonely. Young adults between the ages of 18 and 22 are the loneliest age group. The number of people who live alone has increased by over 30% in the last few decades. And social isolation is as harmful to health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And so I'm sure that we can get a picture of how harmful that could actually become. And of course, a few groups actually relate, they draw a similarity between isolation and loneliness. And so here it alludes to the fact that this increases the risk of premature death by up to 50%. 1 in 5 people say they have nobody to talk to about important matters. And social media use is associated with increased feeling of isolation, of loneliness, and depression. And so people resort to the social media. They get some fun, and they catch up with other people, old schoolmates, and so on, but they do not really have the real relationships that we're looking to build, the connectedness that people are looking to build when you talk about social isolation. All right, so I quickly draw, and of course, we're told also by statistics that men are more likely than women to report feeling lonely and isolated. However, women seek help faster than men. And so I do have a few slides there, quickly drawing the correlation between well-being and loneliness. And so people who actually feel lonely or they are usually isolated, usually it will result to a gap in their mental wellness. And a correlation also between age and isolation. The older you become, elderly people usually will become isolated because they don't have the strength to move around, they don't have the strength to go out, and a lot of people don't just generally check on older people, all right? And so increasing isolation rates are also recorded, particularly, of course, when you compare with the pre-pandemic statistics. And so during the pandemic, for obvious reasons, a lot of isolation. So what is this isolation we're talking about tonight? Isolation, a state of complete and near complete lack of contact. Now, I'm not here to define things to you. I know you know this. We're all knowledge-based people. But then talking about social isolation, drawing a correlation also between that and loneliness. They're two different situations. Because loneliness could be temporary, because you're in a situation, you're single, you're old, and you really don't have people checking on you and so on. But isolation is a deliberate, intentional decision to remove yourself from the midst of people because of certain situations and just completely ostracized. You've not been ostracized by society. Half of the time, it's you taking the decision to say, I'm just not going there. I'm not going to be a part of this anymore, and so on. So what are the causative factors? If you can go to the causes. As most of us are well aware, and I believe that at some point, one period or so in our lives, we've actually been faced with a minimum level of isolation, which you could describe as loneliness. And then, of course, you've had to really separate yourself from groups of people. And so, what usually causes isolation? The causative factors. Sometimes a disease, it could be diseases, is a fact that people just found themselves ill, and so they are incapable. So there is that level of incapacity to do the things that you would normally do regularly. And so you're not able to move around as you wanted. And so you stay at home. We've had situations like that. A lot of people are in care. You also have situations where people, on account of life issues, crisis, disappointment, job losses, they just decide they've had it. Life has been really difficult. It's been bad, and they decide to isolate themselves and stay at home. Or you were looking for a job. You finally, and having searched and searched and searched, you decided, I've had it. I've done my best. And the best wasn't just good enough. And so people decide to stay. So sometimes, and it could be on account of a loss of loved people, loss of a marriage, some people going through a separation, a divorce. All kinds of situations can actually bring about what we now refer to as social isolation. And so social isolation then is a deliberate, intentional way where you move yourself away from the regular people that you relate to, people who give you joy sometimes, or perhaps at some point they've given you joy. Now they no longer give you joy. You've just removed yourself from their midst. It could be family members, it could be work in the workplace. So I quickly cite an example. I think it was in 2017 when I was at a conference. Speaking at the conference on workforce relationship, work-life balance, workforce relationship, and so on. And a lady, after I had spoken so succinctly about my experience in the workplace, the relationships that I had, garnered over the years that actually led to our first investment in some of the investment firms that we manage. And I spoke so highly of the people around us, the community, the ecosystem of support. And the lady asked a question from the audience and said, but what do you do when your back has been broken? Because I cannot relate to all these things you're talking about because in my own situation it's totally different. And that she decided to come out on that particular day to the lecture or to the conference because a friend compelled her and forced her, but that she had not been out of her home for 3 months. I really couldn't imagine it because where I was coming from, I think I was just settling down in Canada at that point. And because of my investment banking background, we were compelled to go on the streets and market and sell and interact with people. If you can't sell, you can't work. So I couldn't even imagine or picture in my mind how it was possible for someone to sit at home for 3 months because he said, in quotes, somebody had broken her back. Of course, I know what it means to break your back, but I was trying to relate that to a workplace. And I think I just said to her, if they break your back, you stand tall and show them and prove to them in faith that no one can break your back, and you stand tall in the midst of all men and do what you need to do. It was just a normal rhetoric from my marketing background. By the time I sat down with her and I understood what she was going through, it wasn't as simple or it wasn't as easy as getting up and showing people nobody's broken your back. She had been through all kinds of situations, from imposter syndrome to racism to all kinds of situations, all the isms as you have them in the books, from sexism and all of those other things, nepotism, favoritism. So she finally got a job that her heart really wanted, her dream job. And then a lot of people kind of, how people just make you feel you're not included, you're not wanted. So it was part of the racism thing, but it just wasn't clear at that time to her. And by the time she was made to feel like she couldn't really perform on the job, she was let go. So it was very shameful for her, the way she was let go. I think it's different from a lot of, maybe culturally, where most of us are from. You're let go, right? But they don't pick up your stuff and then walk you to the door like a security person. And so things like that, it really affected her. So a lot of people might have gone through that, and then they are absolutely in isolation. So what do you do when life situations like that have happened? A couple of other people said to us, we come in with a lot of potentials, with a lot of certificates, but you're not able to put to use what you've learned. What you learned in school, what you've been taught, what you know you have the capacity to do, but you're not able to actually give expression to what you should be doing. What do you do in situations like that? A lot of people are isolated on account of that. And of course, I already spoke about the racism issues. For some people, well, people talk about limited transportation, language barriers, and things like that. I know that people of our ilk, I think we're usually able to surmount those types of challenges. I think those ones are like below the, below the line. They're not things I would usually make, generally BIPOC, black immigrants actually isolate themselves, because we're goal-getters, And so I quickly move to some of the reasons why people are also susceptible to isolation: low income, incapacity to actually manage the costs and the expenses related to moving around in the city, going for what you really want, and so on. Particularly for newcomers and immigrants, they get isolated because of that. There's also the part called the emotional isolation, where it's also actually a part of social isolation, where people that you've actually interacted with so well over time, you just suddenly find out that there's really no meeting of minds anymore. And so it's kind of like a defense mechanism where you now begin to put up a barrier, setting boundaries, and so on, because you really want to protect yourself from the impact of racism and all the other things that we talked about. All right, so what are the general consequences of social isolation? Generally speaking, yes, we know about the mental wellness issues, the gaps, the fact that people now become sick because they've been sitting at home. Because human beings are actually made to move around, up and down, and to relate with their fellow human beings effectively. So what are the consequences? Well, I do have here the issues of distrust, the issues of fear. When you're boxed in by others, you think everyone has an agenda. You can't even trust anyone anymore. Anyone around you, you quickly say, oh, you can't share your thoughts, even in business. So you have a business idea, you're a professional, you're looking for the next level, and you're looking for people to support you to get to the next level. So what are you going to do? You've got to speak to people. You've got to talk to people that were there before you. How can they help you? How did they get there? Learning from their lived experiences and their learned experiences. But you find that when you're in a state of perpetual fear, mistrust of other people, you're not going to talk to anyone, because every little thing you are supposed to share with people, you already are living in fear. And so you really can't get help, because no one even knows what you're doing. You're living in isolation. So the people that ought to recommend you either for promotion, or recommend you for business expansion, or recommend you to your next founder or the next fund, if you're a business person, they really can't recommend you, either because they don't know you so well, you've been so isolated, you don't know where they are, they don't know where to find you, you have a big idea, you can't even execute, neither can you operationalize those ideas. These are some of the consequences. As general as it sounds, they are major consequences of isolation, particularly if you're in business. And so it's important that we take note of this. Negative and low self-esteem, getting easily disappointed. You're not able to manage your expectations anymore because you've been disappointed too often. And so sometimes the people you should really be discussing freely with are not your go-to people anymore. The people that would offer you solutions, generally speaking, they are not the people that you will really normally gravitate towards anymore, because you've been disappointed, and justifiably so. So this is not a lecture to actually, condemn or anything. Justifiably so. Perhaps you shared a few things and so you heard about it somewhere else. So you're not willing to tell anyone anything anymore. You just withdrawn. And so these are some of the consequences from such disappointments, and they lead to isolation. You begin to hide, as it were. You are not able to manage conflict anymore, and you are not where you're supposed to be. Sometimes it even leads to drinking and drug abuse. For some people, yeah, because sometimes, and I'm sure we can think about that, if you're alone, doing what really? And you've been there 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, so what next? And so a few people begin to indulge in all kinds of vices that are not mentionable, they are not worthy of mention, but those things happen. So how, and of course we talked about the medical implications, heart disease, stroke, diabetes type 2 and so on. And you can imagine what that could do. Death, in some cases, very extreme, but it could happen. How can you really tell if you're isolated? Because a lot of people sometimes perhaps haven't given it some thought. How can you really tell that you are actually in a state of social isolation when you begin to withdraw from the things that used to give you joy? The people that you easily could speak to about a few things, personal things, business issues, career, you're not able to discuss with them anymore. So you begin to withdraw gradually. Sometimes a few people actually, when there's a gathering like this, they really don't show up anymore. They used to show up, but they don't show up anymore. As a matter of fact, they even become anxious because they are going to certain places. You begin to know. Those are some of the signs that you are getting isolated. Although what isolation is not, it's also important to state that isolation is not getting alone time, self-care, some time to yourself, a time of retreat. Because as human beings, we must always find time. Having worked all day, then we retreat again and think. A time to think, a time to retreat, a time to discuss ideas with yourself, alone. That's why we call it alone time. Every human being needs that. I know we have retreat with our people we work with and so on. You need your alone time to think about what you've done through the year, to think about how the next year is going to pan out and so on. That's not isolation. You need time for fun too, because we're human beings and we're social human beings, right? And so we need time to actually discuss with ourselves, think about it and so on. We need time for fun. That's not isolation. Please do it as often as you can. We need time for vacation. Do that also. It's not isolation. And you can be alone doing all of those. But what is important then is for us to deal with social isolation. There are 3 ways. The list isn't exhaustive, but I'm just going to discuss this. There's a preventive part. There's a corrective part to it based on our own experience. And so dealing with social isolation and its negative impact is talking about the corrective measures, for instance. One of the ways that we do that, and I'm going to cite a few examples from CASA Foundation and some of the things that we do, getting support from mental wellness experts, counselors, and so on, some of the experts that we have as we speak to them, being deliberate about the company that we keep. And I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with the adage that says we are like, show me your friends, and I'll tell you who you are or tell you your character or whatever. And I'm sure we're familiar with that. Building and improving our connections, our networks, because you are as important, you are as significant as the company that you keep. And so this is really important. Addressing conflict, distilling tension. You know those things that actually could easily aggravate you. And so understanding how to build some boundaries, understanding how to separate yourself from some of those situations would also help you in, improving your wellness and making sure that you're not a social outcast, just saying it the other way. So making sure that you do this is really important. So what are the corrective measures? You find purpose in serving others. I really cannot overemphasize that. The process of finding your purpose on one hand and serving others on the other hand is actually, there's a correlation between that and actually your mental well-being. The more you serve people, the more you feel fulfilled in the areas that you love. So, of course, if you're not a tech engineer, you don't want to get into that serving other people because you're going to mess that up, right? But then if you are, depending on what you're good at, you found your talents, your skills, find a way to serve other people with those. There's a sense of fulfillment and a sense of joy in doing that. And that's actually a panacea to ensuring that you don't become isolated because you're doing what gives you the most joy. That is really important, all right? Get a hobby. Don't just say, I love fishing, and in the last 18 months, you haven't even gone fishing, So get a hobby and make sure it's something you love to do, and find some joy in that. Create bonds. A lot of people talk about strategic alliances. What about the platonic ones? the ones that are not really strategic, because you really don't know when a relationship will turn strategic if you don't even start from the basics. Because a lot of people talk about that. There are several books on strategic alliances, form relationships, and so on. Sometimes if you don't even know the person beside you and form very platonic relationships with them, how do you really know? How can you tell that those relationships could actually turn into something really major for you in the future? But because you're looking at someone and you're looking at what those people have done, where they have been, what they do, what they represent, they are strategic alliances, but then perhaps you need the platonic ones. That's the point. Now, preventive measures encourage healthy and diverse relationships. Give value to others. Celebrate other people. I wanted to say quickly as I begin to wrap up, I wanted to say that in a church community like ours, it's really important, and I'm going to make the slides available to you. I think I'm going to make the slides available to you. I think that's the wrong one. It's not bold enough. I think we have one that ought to be shown. That's the one they should have given the tech guys. In a church community like ours, it's important that we pay attention to the early warning signals. The early warning signals, and that's why I talked about the preventive measures. So it's all the corrective measures. It's already happening, so you can correct them. Find a way to do so. Those are some measures. But there are preventive measures. And in a church community like ours, it's by finding quickly the early warning signals. People who show up, who don't show up anymore, and so on. How do we do that? Deal with the issue quickly. Don't just say, like we say in church community, don't just say, Satan has taken over that has stolen the heart of that person, let him be. No, you are your brother's keeper. So we got to look for them. We got to create hubs. We got to create platforms. We got to create communities and circles, hubs, groups, where people can actually interrelate and get connected. It's one of the ways to quickly, prevent that and nip it before it happens. And so I wrap up with this verse of scripture tonight, and I'm taking the scripture again because I know I'm in a church community, so I'm going to do this. I'm taking it. It's a commentary from the book of 1 John, chapter 5, and I'm reading quickly. It's 5 to 6. It's just a commentary, and I'm reading the Voice. It's the Voice version, and it says, "Just as we do not get to choose our biological brothers and sisters, we do not get to choose our spiritual brothers and sisters either. But what comes along with loving God, the Father, is loving all of his other children, even the really annoying ones." That's what the verse of scripture says. It's there, the Voice. You need to read it. "While it might seem to be easier to go off and live in isolation, rather than put up with those we are not naturally attracted to, those that are not lovable, there are responsibilities that come with living in a spiritual family. Or in fact, the responsibilities that come along with being a role model in God's family. We reflect our worship of God by living in respect with our Christian brothers and sisters." And so I added, we must be disciplined enough not to be the ones who rock the lives out of other people, yet be compassionate enough to give healthy and constructive feedback. Remember, today, most of the work that Christians are expected to do is 10% in the church and 90% in the world. And I'm sure I speak your minds when I say that's what Acts chapter 1 verse 8 says, from Judea to Samaria and so on. So the time that we spend in the church is really limited, 10% of our time. More than 90% is actually spent outside, elsewhere. So how are we impacting? How are we showing ourselves as great examples that will make sure people are not isolated? So our role then, to conclude, is for us to advance, to amplify, and to empower people. And I make bold to say that God himself is more than able to find us worthy to be his witnesses everywhere we go, and then to bring people together so that the connectedness that we build as a people together can ensure that no one is excluded in the long run. All right, so tonight, I thank you again for allowing me to speak. We're going to make the slides available to you. Thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that wonderful talk as a stand. Please a round of applause once again for... Okay. before we go to the next speaker, I just want to encourage us to use the notes you have to just write down questions as it stand. I already have questions that I will love to ask our speaker. Just a teaser, right? This is a church community. One of the questions that is coming to my mind is to ask that. She said something very important. She said isolation is equivalent, is equal to 15 cigarettes a day. Did you pick that? 15 cigarettes a day. So I was trying to do a correlation with that. If isolation is equals to 15 cigarettes a day, cigarettes is an intentional act of killing. Killing is sin, right? Killing is sin, right? So if killing is sin and cigarettes is equals to 15, isolation is equals to 15 cigarettes and so is isolation a sin? Think about it. Think about it. We'll come to question time and we'll talk about many of these as we continue. So I just want to introduce my co-moderator.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Oluwatoyin, and I have the wonderful privilege of also being a moderator this evening. And at this point, we're going to introduce our next speaker. Elizabeth Edu is the founder and psychotherapist of Restore Peace Counseling and Psychotherapy. So Elizabeth is a psychotherapist and the owner of her private practice, Restore Peace Counseling and Psychotherapy, where she works with BIPOC, which stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color, women on issues related to anxiety, identity, and life transitions. She's also a clinician with the community organization Good Shepherd, providing support to youth who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. Elizabeth is passionate about reducing the stigma surrounding mental health and educates her community in culturally relevant and relatable ways. It is my esteemed pleasure to introduce Elizabeth.
Hello, everyone. First, I'd like to just start by saying thank you to the leadership of Restoration House Hamilton for inviting me to come and speak here today. I don't take this opportunity for granted, and I also want to wish them congratulations on the 21st anniversary of this church. So today I will be speaking I just want to say a little bit on our topic of social isolation, particularly in the aftermath of the pandemic. So social isolation is an important topic, and I think all of us have maybe had some sort of experience with it one way or another, having gone through a global pandemic together and had times where we've had to isolate in some form or another. And I think we can't ignore the impact that the pandemic has had on social isolation and the lasting impacts that's had. And I particularly want to speak on the impact that social isolation has had on the populations that I work with that were mentioned earlier, which is BIPOC women and youth who are experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. So to start, I want to talk a bit about the concept of socialization. Can you help me with my slides, please? So I want to start by talking a bit of the concept of socialization. And socialization is the process through which we come to learn and understand cultural norms, behaviors, values, and expectations. And these things are things that we aren't necessarily born with, but they're things that we learn through these various, what we call agents of socialization. So this includes things like family, peers, groups, school, work, so on and so forth. And though this learning is an explicit process and sometimes an implicit process, but these agents give us what we need to, they give us what we need in order to be able to know how to interact with one another effectively. And in one way or another, these various agents of socialization were influenced by the pandemic, whether they were halted or had to take place in some other form. So I want to ask the question of what happens when the socialization process is interrupted. And in asking this question, I was considering the various populations that I work with, and two major themes kind of come up. So the first is the idea of a lack of input from these various agents of socialization. And this particular theme is especially prevalent for those who are experiencing some sort of major life change or shift, those who were in transition from, let's say, elementary school to high school, or from high school to post-secondary or into work, or those who were, experiencing a major move, right? And these things are important because each life stage comes with, new ways of interacting and being with people and learning how to socialize and know what is relevant for that place that you're in. And with the pandemic and some of these things shutting down or being shifted or looking different than usual, a lot of people did not get a chance to get the input that they need in order to know how to interact in these spaces. And with that, not knowing and not having an understanding of the rules of engagement, so to speak, a lot of people felt scared or fear about, interacting in these spaces. So even after the pandemic was over, many people still felt that fear and, had a reluctance to engage with each other because of fear of performing incorrectly or not knowing how to behave in these spaces. And thus you have the result of people choosing to isolate or not go out and, get to learn how to be in these spaces. And then the other major theme that comes up is this concept of forgetting. And I was intentional in choosing this word because it was something that a client had specifically said, a word that a client had specifically said. And I realized that it was a theme across quite a few of my clients. And it's particular to individuals who have maybe already had a chance to get accustomed to the environments and spaces that they were currently in before the pandemic, but then that came in and again, things were shifted and things changed. I would also say that this particular theme is relevant for those who already are more introverted or have, either a diagnosis or suspected social anxiety. And with this theme, there's that experience of losing pre-existing social structures that impact the ability to kind of practice the skills that are associated with, being able to have effective social connection and connect with other people. And with that, loss of these structures, a lot of these individuals felt, feel like it's difficult to restart or continue with where they left off before the pandemic. And when I talk about losing pre-existing social structures, this could be lost through the, death or passing of loved ones. It could be loss of social groups that didn't survive the transition into a more, virtual space, or the loss of spaces that didn't survive the transition back into in-person spaces as well. And Also spaces that maybe lost the ability to, or people losing the ability to adapt to the changes that occurred through the various phases of going into the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic. So with those two themes, I find that encapsulates a lot of the individuals that I work with. And on top of these themes, there are a couple other considerations that come up for the particular individuals that I work with. And these are themes that, or these are considerations that I feel don't get discussed a lot, either due to lack of understanding or lack of awareness, but they're very important, and it's something that I felt it was important to bring to the forefront in sharing today. So the first is neurodivergence. And neurodivergence is a non-medical term that refers to individuals who kind of think or process things a bit differently than what is considered to be typical. And this can include diagnoses like ASD, which is autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, dyslexia, sensory processing disorders, and many others. And for many of these individuals, the ability to, make social connections and interact with people and pick up on the typical, social norms is already quite difficult. So the added impact of, either not having input from the agents of socialization or experiencing that forgetting and not being able to maybe practice some of the skills that they've been learning or picking up on may have added an additional impact or effect on their ability to cope with social interaction in spaces after the pandemic. And I also want to talk about homelessness, as that is a population that I work with, and there's a lot of stigma around homelessness and homeless individuals, and this stigma can prevent people from, reaching out if they're in need of help and support due to a lot of the negative feelings that people already have about this population and a lot of the negative judgments that people already perceive. And that makes it hard for people to kind of come forward and, say that they may be feeling lonely or going through things. Also loss of, or lack of adequate support or difficulty navigating systems and, the various ways of receiving help is also something that impacts individuals experiencing homelessness. And, isolation via the, various barriers that these individuals face and, the harm that's been inflicted and trauma that they may experience also leaves people feeling like they may have to, go at life alone or tackle certain situations alone. And so for everything I've mentioned so far, I think we've already kind of discussed that through our previous speaker, but just some of the impacts of the social isolation that may come from the various factors I've already mentioned include an increase in depression, increase in suicidal ideation, increase in anxiety, increase in interpersonal conflict due to not really knowing how to interact well with people, a decrease in emotional regulation skills, decrease in distress tolerance skills, and also a decline in physical health. So what are some things that we can do to support people who are experiencing social isolation, or even help ourselves if we feel like we are in this space or going through these things? So the first thing I have is to be honest. And that means, kind of being honest with ourselves about, how we're feeling, what we're going through, and also maybe some of the reasons why we may be feeling this way. it's important to kind of validate what it is that we're experiencing and be honest about some of the barriers that we may be experiencing to being able to, go out and seek help and interact with people and, come out of that isolated space. And my second suggestion is to get connected, but with the caveat of do what works for you, right? If you know that you don't like, loud noises and being around lots of people, don't go to a party, don't go to, a space that doesn't work for you. Do what makes sense, right? Maybe you like art, maybe you like, running, right? Join a group or a space that is, relevant to those things. And then, if needed, seek professional help. Sometimes the barriers that we experience require greater levels of support in order to overcome, whether that be, maybe mental health issues or pre-existing traumas that prevent us from being able to, come out of social isolation. So seek help where needed. And then some solutions for supporting other people who may be experiencing social isolation, reach out. And this isn't just for when you notice that somebody's already struggling or is already starting to withdraw, but reach out regularly. It's important that we, stay connected with the people who are in our social group and in our social spaces and have regular communication so that people don't end up in spaces where they're starting to feel isolated. Be a safe space. A lot of people struggle to come out of social isolation or end up in social isolation because they don't feel like the people around them are, safe to speak to, right? Are you the type of person that someone can come to and talk about, the deeper things that they're going through? Are you the type of person who can be validating and listen without judgment? So let's consider that and try and be a safe space for the people around us. And then 3 is know your limits. Oftentimes we may not consider how much we can actually do to support somebody, and if we start to feel burnt out and start to feel low, then we may be doing more harm than good. So know your limits, know what works for you, and kind of work within that. So that's what I have for now. Thank you so much for listening, and if you have any further questions, I'll be ready to answer that during the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. Please a round of applause once again for it's getting more interesting and interesting as we continue. This is quite insightful. There's a lot of talking points also from this, and I hope that you are writing down your question. I know a lot of us are curious now and want to ask questions. There will still be time for that, like I said. You can also please go through slido.com using that particular code that you can see there, 2854619, and you can post questions. This is for those people that are probably you are shy like myself. So you can put up question there. Like I said, a lot of talking points. Talked about lack of input, the whole conversation around forgetting. And I have questions around that. I'll leave it in when we get to the time for question. And then she talked about issue around experiencing loss. And then another interesting thing for me was the neurodivergence that came up. But one thing I want us to do quickly is that she said we should reach out, right? So we want to ensure that we are not isolated while we are here. So please, just turn to the person next to you and reach out. Just say hi. Greet the person next to you, right? Ask for their name. Ask, how are they doing? Right? She said reach out. Be sincere in your reaching out. So let's start practicing it now, right? Reach out. Say hi. Say hi to the person next to you. So some of us are used to the fact that we just go to every place. We are too serious about life, and we are just. So please, are you done reaching out? Nobody's even saying hi to me on the stage. Okay. Hi to you all. Okay. Thank you very much. So we move to the next speaker. The next speaker is Shanta Gray. She's the co-founder, registered social workers and psychotherapists, Winrose Oasis Counseling Service. She's a dedicated professional entrepreneur in the field of mental health. As a registered social worker, psychotherapist, and clinical director, she brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to her work. Serving as the co-founder of Winrose Oasis Counseling Services and the Healing Sisters Cycle, Chantal actively demonstrates her dedication to establishing nourishing environments for children, youths, adults, and families. Her commitment extends beyond therapeutic sessions as she engages in public speaking and collaboration with various organizations. In her practice, she strives to create nurturing and welcoming environments where each person she works with can feel seen, heard, and supported in their unique paths to wellness. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring you Shanta Gray.
Thank you all. Thank you for that introduction. I'm so happy to be here and to join you to talk about social isolation. So let's get right into it. So we probably can all agree that the recent year of the pandemic was interesting, where it made us focus a lot on knowing our well-being is so important and the connections we have. Social isolation, which has become more common, can have profound effects on our mental, emotional, and our physical health. It's interesting to think that in a place like Ontario with 15 million plus people, there are so many that still feel isolated. According to the Government of Canada, nearly 30% of Canadian seniors are at risk of becoming socially isolated, as mentioned before, a significant issue that affects not just individuals, but society as a whole. The World Health Organization estimated that 1 in 4 older people experience social isolation, and between 5 and 15% of adolescents experience loneliness. What's happened? In this discussion, we'll explore what social isolation is, why it's so harmful, and how we can rebuild communities. As was said before, social isolation happens when a person has limited social connections or doesn't regularly interact with others. It's more than just being alone. It has serious impacts on, as mentioned, our mental health, which can cause different mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, affects our sleep, and even our cognitions. So if we're not using our brains or being active, it will decline. So that's why it's important to making sure that you're being actively doing things, whether it's puzzles or to make sure that we're constantly working our brains. Also, people who experience social isolation may feel lonely, disconnected, and may struggle with low self-esteem, or even other trauma symptoms can develop. Some signs of unhealthy social isolation include not enjoying certain things anymore, as was mentioned, frequently canceling plans. I know a lot of us like our bed and like to be in it, but it's important that we still try to get out and have some movement, as well as some anxiety around being in social environments. There are a lot of people, we may not know it, but they do struggle with being in large crowds or small crowds or public speaking, and as a result, they choose to isolate. Also, if you feel dread about social activities, so knowing you have to go to that family function and you're like, ugh, I don't want to go. These are signs to pay attention to. Obviously, there's might be good reasons for it, but just something to pay attention to. So when growing up in Jamaica and then moving to Canada, I noticed a big difference in the way people socialized here. In Jamaica, it was common for your neighbors to just come over. The neighbor beside you did your hair. The next person over there, brought you things or cooked for you. Whereas here, it's more individualistic. Would you agree? Yes. So I think it is especially hard for a lot of us immigrants who come here and have to deal with this change. Yeah. And, in Canada, it's more independent, where our connections are more scheduled or organized. I know now that I'm more Canadianized, you have to call me before you just show up, right? But that sometimes can also create some social isolation. I have had a client who shared that the only way she communicated with people is when she attended her medical appointments. So shows how isolated she is, or when she had her therapy appointments. So when she came to talk to me, she would share her whole week because I was mainly one of the only persons she talked to. It's also important to understand the difference between loneliness and isolation. Loneliness is a feeling, an emotional response to feeling disconnected, while isolation is an objective state where you lack social interactions, though they can often go hand in hand. In my work with clients of all ages, I've seen many people struggle to make new friends, turning to apps like Bumble BFF to connect, which speaks to the wider need for intentional community. Who else finds it more challenging to make friends in adulthood? Yes, I see some hands, yes. Once we start working, or we have children, or school, or things with family members, it gives us a little time to communicate and connect with others. Also, when we face challenges or difficult periods in our lives, it's natural to want to spend time alone. Even Jesus did, to rejuvenate ourselves, right? However, if this is ongoing, where we just stay away for weeks on end, this can turn into a pattern where we start to wonder if people actually care, or we start to think very negative thoughts. So while it's important to have time to reflect and meditate and figure out what's next steps, it also can drive into the other part where we just totally isolate ourselves. Our minds can fall into these negative traps, and before we know it, we're further isolated, believing we don't need anyone, which leads to depressive symptoms. Yet, it's important to remind ourselves that we do deserve healthy connections, love, and support. Statistics show that social isolation has been rising steadily over the years, but the pandemic, as was mentioned, accelerated this trend. We're more connected online, but ironically, this has led to fewer in-person interactions and real-life relationships. In my work, I've also seen how hurt from family, friends, or even our church community or other communities can lead to resentment of people. Being hurt by friends, family, or different communities can deeply impact one's willingness to connect with others. Friendships often require a high level of trust and vulnerability, so when that trust is broken, it's hard to gain it back. The question for you is, do you create an environment that allows for people to trust you and be vulnerable, or are you contributing to causing someone to isolate? Negative experiences with others, such as betrayal, neglect, or even subtle forms of exclusion, can lead to a sense of being guarded, making people wary of new friendships or social interactions. They may start to question the intentions of others or feel a sense of anxiety at the thought of opening up again. For many, these experiences contribute to self-protective behaviors like keeping new connections at arm's length, cutting people off quickly. I know this is a trend where everyone's just cutting off everybody. Or choosing isolation over potential hurt, even when you desire companionship or community. Past hurts can cause someone to second-guess their instincts and close themselves off from what they truly want, which is meaningful and supportive, healthy community. However, finding safe spaces and gradually building trust with the right people can help. Healthy connections are possible, and often they start with slow, small, low-pressure interactions. Healing from these past hurts may involve recognizing and validating the impact they've had, and gradually testing the waters with people who demonstrate kindness, reliability, and empathy. The consequences of socialization aren't just mental or emotional, they're physical too. Research shows that chronic isolation can lead to heart disease, weakened immune function, and even a shortened lifespan. When we lack social support, we often lose the motivation to stay active, healthy, and engaged in life. Simply put, We're not designed to live in isolation. Humans have always gathered in communities for survival, support, and companionship. Community isn't just practical, it's a source of emotional strength and a sense of belonging. Proverbs 27, verse 17 says, "As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another," which shows that we truly need each other to continue to sharpen each other. Being part of a community has many benefits that combat isolation. First, it provides support. A strong community includes people you can rely on during tough times, but sometimes pride or fear of judgment keeps us from leaning on others. But holding stress and emotions inside has health consequences. Finding trusted individuals or spaces where we feel safe to share is crucial. It's also worth noting that sometimes the community we've known, like a church or a group of friends, may have hurt us. And in that case, it's okay to set some boundaries and seek a new community that serves you better. Communities also can pool resources, knowledge, and skills to solve problems together, whether it's offering financial help, sharing in the childcare, organizing food banks, and providing emotional support. This sharing not only strengthens individual members, but also fosters a collective resilience. Community also creates opportunities for connection, whether through sharing a meal, attending religious services, joining a club, or volunteering. Studies consistently show that people who are socially connected tend to live longer and happier, which is why we see that various cultural and racial groups tend to live in close proximity to each other. Many cultural groups around the world live close together, often forming tight-knit groups or communities in neighborhoods, towns, or villages. This pattern stems from various reasons, such as shared language, traditions, or religious beliefs and values, which foster a sense of belonging and mutual support. Living near others who understand one's cultural practices can make it easier to uphold traditions, celebrate holidays, and support each other through life events. Community can also provide accountability, motivating us to make healthy choices and stay on track with our personal goals. So how do we start building or rebuilding the communities we need? It starts with intention. We need to actively make time to reconnect with people we already know and seek new connections that align with our values and interests. Small acts like inviting someone for tea or coffee, joining a local group, attending church or religious services, or even saying hello to a neighbor can create pathways to deeper connections. Volunteering is another great way to meet people while contributing to a shared cause. Even our workplaces can become places of connection through team building activities and casual social gatherings. Let's not overlook technology, which has its negative and positive side, which can be helpful in creating community. If we use it wisely, online groups can provide a sense of belonging for those who may be isolated due to health or their location. But it's important to balance virtual interactions with real-life ones to maintain a true sense of connection. Also, getting outside. I know it's hard in the winter, and we don't like the snow, but it's important to still get outside and see people. That's helpful for connection. Getting outside and spending time in nature or picking up a solo hobby can boost our mental health, which makes it easier to connect with others in a positive way. To close, I encourage us to reflect. Can others count on me to show up and follow through on commitments? Do I contribute to an environment where people feel valued and included? How are you contributing to the betterment of your community or relationships? As we leave here, let's each think about small ways we can connect, whether it's reaching out to an old friend, joining a new group, participating in community activities, or volunteering. Remember, we're stronger together, and even small steps can make a significant difference in building a supportive community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chantal. That was very insightful. I think there's been a lot that we can garner from what was just said, especially us as a church. One of the reasons that Restoration House Hamilton has this event is because we are a church with vision, and we want to have a positive impact on our community. We already have so many different initiatives. We have turkey at Thanksgiving, we have Christmas hampers, we have our food bank. But we want to go a step beyond and educate our community, and we as a church want to do our part. So this is why we have events like this. This is why we have the public lecture. And there's something that Chantal spoke on that is very, very key, and she said we have to have intention. And the fact that all of you are here today shows your intentionality. So give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you so much for coming out and educating yourself on this very key issue. So we're going to move on to our questions and answers, correct?
Yeah.
All right.
So another thing she said which caught my attention is the fact that we should smile. Yes. So please smile. Smile to your neighbor. Turn to your neighbor and smile. Smile. That's very important. Okay, so we are going to open up the floor for question and answer. First and foremost, a round of applause again for these wonderful presentations that we've had. So we open up the floor for questions. Like we said, if for any reason you don't want to say the things you want to say here, you can post on slido.com using that particular code. We have questions here already, 17 questions already here.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but before we come to the questions here, we want to first treat the ones that are in the audience. So if you have any question, you can just raise up your hands. Okay, so I'll just do 1, 2, and 3. And then we call again for another round of questions. So what we will do is that you ask the question, our speakers will take notes of the 3 questions, and then we go a round of answering. Right? Okay, thank you very much. 1. This is 1 here.
Right here.
Are you connecting, sir? Isolation. Okay, so now that is 1, 2, and then this will now be 3. Okay.
Good afternoon or good evening, and thank you so much for bringing up this topic. I want to sincerely thank our speaker. Quite a lot of eye-opening around social isolation. The reality is many are going through social isolation unknowingly. So the question I want to ask, which I need a little bit of clarity around neurodivergence, which you mentioned. You did emphasize around what we consider to be normal or typical. So who determine the benchmark? How do you know what is normal and what is typical? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Great sessions and great incisive, tips you've shared with everyone. So my viewpoint is, I know a couple of people who are introverted, non-ambivalent or non-extroverted, and they enjoy being by themselves. They don't like being around people. So what advice or what suggestions would you give to people like that who generally don't like to interact with people or socialize with people? Thank you.
Okay, 3.
Hi, my name is Ife, and I want to thank you all for this great presentation. My question is this, social isolation, yes. Sometimes people make those connections, but the major challenge is maintaining those connections. I just want to ask, do you have suggestions to us to how to maintain, because you make a lot of connections, then maybe after 6 months, you just find out that you are alone again. So how do you maintain that connection so that you don't lose those connections?
Okay. So we'll come back to this to you, and in no particular order, you can take up the questions.
I can start with answering the question regarding neurodivergence. So in terms of what is considered typical, I would say generally from experience that is not so clearly defined. But regarding maybe some of the diagnoses that I mentioned, there's usually certain criteria that are looked at to determine, what differs from the standard of how people would behave, right? So the typical isn't just one thing, but it is what falls within a range of what you can expect within a certain group of people. And what is typical can vary from location to location or between groups of people. But there are kind of standardized tests and assessments that we look at to determine what that is. And I'd also say, in a general sense, anything that, would, behavior that would cause maybe distress compared to how, other people may react in that situation, or, maybe processing things in a way, or not being able to process things maybe at the speed or level that other people are able to process them. Things like that would kind of be classified as neurodivergent, but usually assessments of ADHD and ASD are, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, and ASD, autism spectrum disorder, I would say are like the big two diagnoses regarding neurodivergence.
And I would add, it would be best to seek a doctor or a psychologist to get that diagnosis. But if you do notice that you learn a little differently, that might be something to pay attention to. And oftentimes, women are diagnosed later in life. If you found that you struggled a lot in school and you're like, what is happening? It might be something to pay attention to.
All right, I'll speak to your question on connectedness, how to ensure you remain connected. I think certain routines would work well. And so you find that we're social human beings. That's just who we are. And so you realize that even if you've lost people, then you have a desire to get connected again after a while. So setting routines becomes really important. Routines like showing up. You get you get invited to a lot of events. And perhaps if you don't get invited, you search. So on Eventbrite, there are different platforms actually. And so you can fish out, you figure it out. What's happening in Hamilton or Halton region, Hamilton, yeah. So what's happening? Is it related to my sector? What am I looking for? Am I looking to build my career? Am I looking to build a new business? So what's happening in the neighborhood? And so even if we don't get invited, so we find those platforms where we invite ourselves. What I mean is Eventbrite would make sure you register for some of those events, and then you get there, you get connected again. So now you get connected again or reconnected. How do you keep those relationships? It's a question. The routines. Let's have tea and coffee. I think somebody mentioned that. You get tea and coffee. You find a way to communicate with people. What are the similarities? What are the common denominators? And do you want to really speak to that? Because we've got to build relationships if we really want to grow. Whether it's a career or a business, we need to grow. And setting those routines to meet with them again, to set tea meetings, coffee meetings, get to meet me in the office, get connected on LinkedIn. Yes. Like what people are saying, don't just keep scrolling, and things like that. Because because I know we do have a habit of checking out what people are doing and we scroll. Sometimes because we're looking to develop our career or business, you like what people say, you make a comment. There is no way people will not notice who is commenting on their articles. And there is no way you will ignore people like that forever. So one of the things we usually recommend if you're looking for a mentor, it's one of the ways to, right? Accountability partners and so on. They just don't fall from the sky. They're not just going to happen. You've got to look for them. And one of the fastest ways to do so is to leverage the advantage of social media. So sometimes we don't even know the type of people we're looking for. Mentors, accountability partners, colleagues, people in our industry that we want to, that have become like role models to us that we're really looking to follow. We need to select a few of them, 3, 4, 5 at a go sometimes. And then you follow them. And then you like and comment on some of the things they say. And then you write them actively by checking their website. How do you write them? You check their website. Perhaps they're working on LinkedIn. You DM them. We find a way to get connected to people. And sometimes if you've identified them, maybe 6, 7, 8, sometimes you might actually write 3, 4, 5 of them, believing that 2 will eventually respond, so that you don't get discouraged. So you're looking for a group of people in a sector, engineering, tech, or whatever. You've researched into them, you Googled them up, and so on. Write about 4 or 5 of them so you don't get disappointed. Just like we're looking for a job, and we don't apply to 1 or 2 at a go. We apply to several, believing that 1 or 2 will eventually pan out. So it's one of the ways to stay connected. And then showing up is also important. So you've searched on EB, you found it, show up finally. Then you finally show up, keep the appointments. Don't keep missing them, because it can be a put-off. If you have appointments and you're not able to meet them, you're not able to meet them up. Somebody also said, can I go on? Somebody asked a question on introverted people. Yeah, introverted people. I think the same would also apply, because no matter how introverted we are social human beings, and we want to grow, like somebody cited an example of wanting to do great things and sitting in the dark winking. Nobody's really seeing what you're doing, although you're introverted. But it's still not an excuse. We want to make giant strides in business or want to increase in career. We've got to get up and be intentional about doing that and applying maybe, some principles closer to some of the suggestions over there. But people will be introverted, people will be extroverted, sanguine, whatever category you fall into, we've just got to reach out. The other thing is perhaps search for similar people, because you will identify people within a crowd. Someone is there, you're networking, everyone is mingling and so excited to be there, but you see a few people just sitting by the corner. Sometimes they say we black, BIPOC people usually don't mingle a lot. When you get to an event and you see people standing alone and you think you're introverted, it's the people that stand alone that you gravitate towards. It's just statistics. It tells us that they will usually connect faster. But some people get to an event and everyone is excited, and talking. But those ones are lonely in the corner. Sometimes if you go to them, you find that you have a meeting of minds and you're able to form connections easier, much easier. Thank you.
I wanted to add to that. I think nothing's wrong with being introverted. We all have a social battery, and I think it's important to pay attention to, because being around people, it takes a lot, and it's okay to want to revert and take some time to get your energy back. But I think the point you said around it being introverted and not liking people, I think that's the part to think about and reflect on is, why don't you like people? What is it about the people that you're around? Are they sucking the energy out of you? And then that may be time to think about finding new people that actually provide you energy and give you support.
Okay, thank you very much. Talia, you probably read the online. Yeah, sure.
Okay, so the first question that we have, where is the line between being nosy and reaching out, especially where lots of folks are new immigrants who likely need connections but also want to be private?
This is a great question. I think a lot of the people that I meet with struggle with this, and I think there's nothing, it's important to check in with people, but we have to also allow people to know and share their boundaries. If they don't want to share, then they don't have to share. But if you don't reach out, then you won't know if they're open to sharing. So, if you're asking every day about the same issue, that might be a problem. But if you check in once a week or twice a week, I don't see a problem with that. It's up to the person then to communicate if it's a problem.
Okay. What we'll do is, like I said, we now have 19 questions online. And I know we'll probably have more questions here. So I will just ask the question, just one panelist will answer one, and then we'll just move on, right? So before she reads again, do you have anybody that have question? Okay, let's go to the slide, right? Okay, thank you very much. Second question.
Okay. As the seasons change, how can we prepare ourselves and our minds for the triggers that lead us to isolate ourselves?
I'll go ahead and answer that. So, seasonal changes, not just into winter, but even all throughout the year, can be really hard on people. But I think the winter, especially, is a time where a lot of people experience seasonal depression or even just lower mood in general. I think, since we're talking about the topic of social isolation, being intentional about making time to spend time with loved ones, friends, do things that you enjoy, make you happy, could be really helpful. Also, if you know that, wintertime and the cold is something that doesn't work well with your spirit, stay warm. Maybe it's spending more time by the fireplace or doing things that that bring up feelings that remind you of better seasons, better times. I know some people talk about using I think light boxes to kind of bring more brightness into their space so things don't feel so dark and dreary all the time. So I think those are a few things, but I think it comes down to intentionality and not just letting the season pass you by, but scheduling things into your day, your weeks, the coming months that bring joy.
Okay, thank you very much for that. This question, related to the question I asked initially, said, how can we, as Christians, avoid labeling those suffering from social isolation as potential sinners and instead see them as people in need of our love and care?
Okay, I'll take a stab at that. I'll try. Yeah, I mean, everyone is a sinner, so we come into Christ, and I'm sure we know. So we're accepted in the beloved. Now, I think that, and it's heartwarming that our pastors are here. I think it's a structural issue. I think a structure might address that in form of creating structures and platforms, which I reckon we might already have. And I think it's actually making sure that we take advantage of those platforms. So in terms of creating ecosystem, like an ecosystem of support, whether it's a counseling area and so on. And so there's one part of it where people are labeled. There's another part where even if you're labeled, you seek help. And I think that could be found on such platforms. One is for each one of us to understand that, and we keep getting ourselves educated over and over again, because sometimes it's actually a lack of education to understand that we're accepted in the beloved and that everyone has gaps and that we have to always embrace ourselves in love, because that's actually what the Christendom, the community, is all about. So first, if you feel you're labeled, I think you need to seek help, because you won't even open up to anyone. You want to isolate yourself completely. So how do you assure yourself that you are really loved and accepted in the beloved? That one, God loves me so much, I know it. Even when nobody's telling you, you have to tell yourself. But the other part is now, if you're at that point where you really can't tell yourself anymore because the damage has already been done, that's where you find help. So circles of support in the counseling department. There must be also a way to escalate it to the next level if the counseling is perhaps not working. So that's why I said we're glad that they're here so that they will be able to take charge. But this is a structural issue. Platforms must be built to intentionally address those issues, I think.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Closely related to that question, somebody asked, at what point do we need to know when it's time to seek professional help? Are there any pointers?
Yes, that's a great question. So if you're noticing that you're not doing your usual daily tasks, you're finding it more difficult, challenging, more tired, wanting to isolate, your sleep is impacted, your appetite's impacted, well, hopefully before you get fully there, but if you're starting to notice changes, that's when I would seek help. And at any point when you're ready to, I think that's the important part. So yes, as long as you're noticing changes in your day-to-day, seek help.
Thank you very much. I'm going to read this one verbatim. So it says, when we talk about connection with people, how is that possible in cases like in church where the Yorubas sideline other people from a different tribe?
Okay.
Yeah, anybody can go for it. Issue of
Okay.
classism.
All right. Yeah. You would always have. Now, we're all familiar with racism, nepotism. Yeah. We must understand it though, that it's actually a fact of life that people will ordinarily gravitate gravitate towards people that they are more familiar with, you know what I mean? Particularly when we're talking, cultural issues and so on. So culturally, language is always a barrier. So once people speak your language, you want to gravitate towards them. But, and so that's a normal thing in life generally. Mm-hmm. However, when it comes to a point where someone is trying to sideline because of this and that, I think the platforms and the policy issues and structural issues that I mentioned earlier might also apply in situations like that, where a conscious, intentional, deliberate effort is put in place to make sure that situations like that are addressed. And I'm glad that we're in a community, particularly in a church community, where situations like that will definitely be addressed. However, also, I think also personally, for the individual itself, himself or herself, it's also possible that you can also create some circle, because it's all about building friendships and building networks. And so it's important that we know immediately wherever we are. We talk a lot about the intersectionalities. Every room we get into, we're dealing with intersectionalities on a daily basis. Is it a gender one? Is it a youth one? Is it colored people, professional people, cultural people, business people? There are divergences in the room. Create yours too. It might also be a solution. You see like-minded people, you speak the same language. You're not creating to divide. You're creating so that you can build connectedness, connectivity amongst yourselves. So you can also do that. But of course, if it's within the church community, of course, it has to be under the watch of the current structure. But that also helps you. And then it helps you not to feel left behind, if that is possible. Book clubs, tea meetings, tea parties. It creates some connectedness, as I might say. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. This question here is quite interesting. And I will crave the indulgence of our host. And coincidentally, he's also a spiritual person as well as a science person. So I will crave the indulgence of our pastor, PYD, to answer this particular question. The question said, what's the line between labels, diagnosis, and spiritually speaking in faith? At what point do we draw the line between label, actual diagnosis, and spiritually speaking in faith?
Thank you. I want to thank all the presenters for the great job. Come on, let's appreciate them. Yeah. So who label you? That's the first question. Who diagnose you is the second question. Then the spiritual, speaking in faith, right? Yeah. So those are things the person needs to come to terms with. If it's a diagnosis from a physician, then you have to address it. Then if the label is from the way you are behaving, your upbringing, your character, there are things you have to also look into, just like we've been advised tonight, that you have to really check yourself from time to time. Then spiritually speaking, we speak by faith. That's what we are taught spiritually. So the word of faith should not depart from your mouth. In Joshua 1:8 says you should meditate on the word. Not just meditate, not just think over it again and again. He also say you have to speak it out. So that is also part of our faith. But the point is, if you have been diagnosed, you can't ignore it. Because I've seen many people diagnosed with, especially, let's use cancer for an example, and people have ignored that. And as a result, they have died. They said they are standing on faith. Don't forget that knowledge is given by God. So science is good. So you can't ignore science in the things of faith.
Thank you very much for that. You've heard that from the very source. Quickly, this question is quite interesting. I will just ask this. Can laziness be confused as social isolation? Anybody can pick on that.
I can try. Laziness, social isolation. I don't think there's a correlation. I think, not absolutely. I think laziness could lead to social isolation, but it isn't social isolation. You're lazy, you're plain lazy. I think I just like to say it that way because I think that man is actually made to get up. And when I say man, I mean all peoples, made to get up and go do the work. Laziness and isolation are not the same. If you're lazy, you're lazy. If you're isolating, there's a reason. If you're lazy, exactly the word itself, is the definition is different. You just don't want to do anything. Social isolation is on account of the reasons that we clearly articulated earlier, all the speakers, because of illness, because of a state of mind, because of rejection, racism issues. So some things led to that isolation, and you need to deal with them either medically, emotionally, or, on some other way. But the laziness part, I think the Bible also addresses that, that we can't be running from the lion on the street and then hiding. We've got to do the work. It's not the same thing.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. So we have some pretty popular ones here, so I'm going to try and loop them all together. So it says tips for preventing loneliness and staying sane in long, hard seasons where friends' lives are going great and yours isn't. And then just to tie on to that, not being jealous, just can't relate to their lives anymore, and feeling pitied and talked about, or you've heard things when you hang out, so you're kind of just avoiding hanging out because of those implications.
Yeah, I think this is a big one that a lot of people struggle with. In terms of friendships, I think it's important that we communicate how we feel, but it's important to know, are we surrounding ourselves with people who we can be open and vulnerable with? And it's not to say that everyone we should share with. There's always going to be the few that we feel more comfortable with. In terms of them being in different stages of their life, just because they're in a happy state doesn't mean that, we shouldn't share. If they're true friends, they will still be there for us despite what they're going through. So I think it's just important to communicate. And if they are talking about you, then that needs to be addressed. Or I guess this is where you think about, is this relationship serving you anymore?
Okay, thank you very much. I will just ask the last question. As it stands, you see the 40 minutes just happened that way. There's a lot of questions that we still have here, but unfortunately we will not be able to address all, right? Okay, somebody want to ask a question? Okay, so I will take that and then I'll ask the last question, which is very important. Okay?
Just a quick one. I'm being tempted to ask this question based on what the top speaker said regarding the experience and the way people relate. I'm such a person that I like people coming around me. I also like to visit people. And that was the way I was brought up, and I grew with that all my life. I don't need anybody to tell me before coming to visit me. But I had a couple of experiences here And I just want to know whether it's a matter of principle I'm tending towards social isolation. And the reason why I'm asking that question is the fact that a couple of experience. I had the mind of celebrating some people and to give them a surprise. And I found my way. I wanted to celebrate those people, not anything from them, just to celebrate them and to honor them. But I was shocked, not once, not twice. I was told that no, you can't come into my house, that we have to do it at the nearby restaurant. And at that point in time, so I've gotten to a point where for me to go to people's house, you need a special prayer. So I'm saying this because I'm trying to see whether I'm tending towards social isolation or it's a matter of principle.
You are tending towards social isolation. So I don't want one or two people to discourage you in the things of the kingdom because we're not all the same. We're not all at the same level of spirituality. But if you take such a decision because of what one or two people have done, you have to watch it. And God, and some people's blood might be in your hand. So you need to look into that. Another reason why I stood up, somebody wrote this, and it's better. I love to educate people. In this church, a newcomer comes looking for peace, thinking it's mostly Africans, especially Nigerians, but finds the people acting differently. What do we do? This is not a Nigerian church. So, can you clap? It's not a Nigerian church. Yeah. So, the vision God gave us is not an African or a Nigerian church. This is a multiracial, multi-ethnic church. And God told us, God gave us a scripture for it, that people of all nations will flow into it. So if you have come with that mindset of a Nigerian church, you might need to look for another Nigerian church. So whoever wrote that question, you can see me. I can educate you further. But this is not a Nigerian church. So people are not acting. In fact, a friend of mine came to our church and he said, even your songs have changed again. What's going on? Because we are now singing Afro gospel song. This church is not a Nigerian church. And I need to clarify the vision again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. So the last question, this is very important, is how does one assess affordable, underlined, I'm underlining that, culturally and spiritually sensitive therapy and counseling in the church, and maybe outside too, any resource? In your bio, I raised the organization in which you found. You probably want to stress that at this point.
Yes, so you can always come to Windrose Oasis Counseling Services. We do in-person and virtual services, as well as Elizabeth has her own private practice. And also you can access Psychology Today. There's always a list of different therapists on there that you can find, especially if you do virtual. You can use anyone from Ontario. There's also different community services here in Hamilton. There is the Hamilton Urban Core, Good Shepherd, that are free, but sometimes they do have a wait list. And if you do have benefits through work, you can use that with different therapists.
I'll also like to add, Black Therapist List is a resource that is specific to Black therapists, so that's something you could look through as well. Also, a lot of therapists, a lot of practices offer affordable counseling through like maybe junior therapists or student therapists, so that's also something you can look into.
So to answer that question, because I refer, there are lots of free psychotherapists, and the government of Ontario or the government of Canada It's got a lot of resources. Some of them are online. You have CBT, you have bouncing back, you have Ontario psychotherapy, which you can be referred to. You can speak to your doctor. Even some of the churches, like Catholic churches, they have free counseling services. Like there is one on Main Street East every Tuesday, which is a walking Good Shepherd. So there are a lot of them that you can access.
A round of applause once again for our speakers. So what we'll do now, we'll just give it in 30 seconds thereabouts, final thoughts, and then after that we invite our hosts for appreciation.
All right, thank you again. Well, tonight I think I've had a wonderful time, but I would leave this with you. Think again about the type of connections you want to make, leaving a lasting impression, any room you get into. It's one of the ways that people remain connected with you, because you've got to leave something in the mind of people that they will remember. So try and craft that out and master it by heart. Usually we call it a 1-minute pitch, an elevator pitch. My name is this is what I do, this is where I do it, and this is how I do it. So you leave it in their minds, and they want to remember or get connected with you on LinkedIn or any of the social media platforms. That's how to remain connected. Thank you again, everyone.
I think I would leave us with just asking us to think about how we show up for people and how we can prevent social isolation by providing space for people who are going through that experience to come to us and be able to share, and our ability to reach out to others and make sure that we aren't leaving people behind, right? As human beings, as a church, as a body, it's important that we stay connected and that we don't just put all of the responsibility on the individual, but that we also do our due diligence to make sure that we aren't isolating people or leaving them in a space where they don't feel like they can come forward when they need support.
All great points, and I would just add, we often talk about self-care and what we can do for ourselves, but I just encourage you to have community care. What are we doing for each other? How are we being involved? Are we volunteering? Are we checking in on each other so that we feel supported and can thrive and be joyful as we go through this life?
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you once again for joining us today. Thank you all for coming out. I want to use this opportunity to invite our very own PYD and PTD for the vote of thanks.
So we want to appreciate our speakers. They've done tremendously well. Yes. We also want to appreciate the organizers for putting this together. A lot of people have still not understood the importance of public lecture, but this is something that is so profound that is needed in our community. If there's anything that resonated with me that I want to also emphasize is to serve. We're told we need to serve. So if you are not serving in Restoration House, it's something to think all over again. They said we should serve. Find a purpose or find purposes by serving others. By serving others. So we have a lot of volunteer positions, a lot of opportunities to volunteer. We have food bank. You can volunteer in our church office, which we run every day of the week. So there are different departments, and you can connect. And what we have seen in 21 years, people that are really settled down in the church, in the community, they are people who have joined one small group or the other, which is what you've also emphasized tonight. So we want to encourage you to join one small group or the other. In fact, we have seen people, you spoke about platonic relationship. in the choir, people marry themselves. And, because they form this close-knitted, community. So you need to, you're still saying you are single, you can't find someone, join a department. Tell your neighbor, join a department. Find purpose by serving others. So we want to appreciate our speaker again. Let's appreciate them. Dr. Oluwatoyin, thank you. Yes. Elizabeth Sidowu, come on, let's appreciate Elizabeth. Yeah. And this is Dr. Chanta Gray. Yeah. Let's appreciate her. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. A round of applause for yourself, people. Okay. Sir, we want to bring you back again on stage, this time with our very own PTD for a picture. Please, a round of applause for our very own PTD. Okay. Thank you once again, everyone. Please, a round of applause for yourselves for being part of this event for 2024. We wish you the best, and we hope to see you next year again for another wonderful session. My name is Hosea Patrick Olaiwola, and with me is
Talia Otun. Thank you so much for coming out today.
Thank you very much. See you next year.